The sirens hit first, 3 rising notes slicing the morning haze over the channel, and then the silver holes broke through the fog like teeth. I watched from the catwalk of the lighthouse as the Coast Guard cutters knifed the current, white spray lifting in veils, loudspeakers booming commands that rattled the glass behind me. A helicopter's shadow spun across the basalt ledge at my feet. Down below, the white yacht that had swaggered into my cove just after sunrise suddenly shrank to the size of a lie. People who talk big go very quiet when everything real shows up at once. 72 hours earlier, I'd been standing in the same spot, breathing in the sharp brine and wet kelp and cedar, thinking about where to mount a rain gauge. The gulls were fighting over something shiny on the south rocks. The lighthouse lantern key light, decommissioned in 1971, wore its years like a war medal. My name is Cal Bennett, 37, and until 4 months ago my job was reading other people's route-size pings, drone paths, customs declarations that don't add up. Air and marine operations taught me to hear lies in engine noise. When I accepted Lantern Key from the restitution list, everyone I cared about said I was crazy. "You'll get bored," my sister Ellie told me. "You don't do quiet." It wasn't quiet. It was the opposite of quiet. It was a doorway the first day. I set up a weather mast on the gallery and bolted an anemometer into place while the late sun flattened itself into gold on the channel. The second day I mapped the island's 11 acres, ferns and salal under the pines, a ribbon of trail to a pocket beach where black stones clicked in the tide. The third day, before dawn had an opinion, I heard a humming that didn't belong. Not wind, not gull. The sound was sharp on the edges, like a chainsaw tuned by a pilot. I stepped out with the binoculars. A de Havilland beaver in cherry paint rode the fog, floats kissing my cove like it had done it 1,000 times. Behind it, to center consoles cut V's toward my dock. And far out in the sheep-colored light, a white spear of a yacht put its nose toward my mooring ball. The plane taxied in as if it owned the tide. People spilled onto my dock like a brochure matching blazers with a crest I didn't recognize. A man in a county tan with a badge number that began with letters, and at the center of the composition, a woman whose posture suggested the world should apologize for being late. She waited until her photographer had his angle and then gave me a smile. "I couldn't find any blood in you. Must be the new occupant," she said, turning occupant into a slur. "I'm Vivian Carr, president of Harborview Bluffs Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your situation." The way she said situation made the ground feel like a trap door. A leather folio appeared from nowhere. Her nails were immaculate. By authority of the Coastal Conservancy Covenant of 1901, she paused to let the number do the work. "All islands within 2 nautical miles of the Harborview shoreline fall under our community governance. Your property is subject to our bylaws, dues, architectural review, environmental oversight, and emergency mitigation protocols. The previous owner was in arrears. You inherit those obligations." Her photographer breathed like a metronome. The fake deputy adjusted his belt as if waiting for his line. The crest on their blazers was a compass rose, with west pointing northeast. The paper she offered me was aged the way people are aged. For beer commercials, copperplate fonts, waxy seals that had never met heat, the word ecosystem deployed as if it were born in 1901. I'd spent 10 years reading fakes in briefing rooms until my eyes felt bruised. The tells were happy to be found. It referenced national oceanic standards that did not exist in Theodore Roosevelt's vocabulary. It cited markers installed in 1927. It used the phrase littoral buffer zone in the same sentence as wharfage rights. "Like a child trying on her mother's shoes. You owe $62,000 in back assessments," she said, "and a maritime maintenance fee of $5,000 per month going forward. You'll need to cease all construction and present a plan to our architectural committee by Friday. Our environmental committee will need immediate access to your structures for inspection. The runway," she gestured toward the grass strip, "from the 1950s that hadn't seen a landing since the island was a crabber's supply depot, is an obvious hazard. We'll be bringing in mitigation teams." Behind her, the man in county tan avoided eye contact. His shoulder patch declared him Marine Patrol, but the fish in the emblem was the wrong species. "Of course," she said lightly, "if this feels burdensome, the association is prepared to make a generous offer. 7 days, cash, and you get your life back." People forget that intimidation speaks at 2 volumes. The loud one and the one it uses when it believes it has already won. I let her finish. I let the camera take me in like I was a landmark. Then I set my wrench down, and the part of my life that knows a bluff sat up. "I'll need corporate filings, tax records, meeting minutes," I said, "and the statutory authority by which a private subdivision believes it governs navigable coastal waters. Oh, and I'll need your deputy's name and number for my records." The deputy swallowed. Vivian's smile shrank, then held. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I don't think you understand how this works. That is the moment every bully writes into the script. That is also the line you put on tape." They left in a choreography calibrated to be insulting, heels clicking on my dock, boat props raking the water like they were cutting lines. I'd just tide, the seaplane lifting out of the cove with the photographer half hanging from the door to frame my lighthouse as if it leaned. The yacht's flag snapped in the wind. Bahamas, not Harborview, when the wake washed my pilings. I called exactly 2 people. The first was Ria Solis, ADHS liaison who never wasted a preposition. Birdwatching, I said. Our code was older than our job titles. Flocks moving north all at once. Keep the feeder stocked, she said. We're listening. The second was my attorney, who specialized in maritime property and had a sense of humor floral enough to be medicinal. When I texted her the 1901 covenant, she sent back 5 laughing emojis and a voice note. Ecosystem in 1901. Darling, the call started at 6 the next morning. An environmental committee recording informed me that a concerned citizen had reported illegal fuel storage, wetlands, seabird nesting violations, noise pollution. A man with a laminated inspector badge that would embarrass a thrift store tried to step off a skiff onto my dock with a clipboard that contained exactly 1 page. He kept trying to say warrant like it meant the thing he wished it meant. The camera on my weather mast logged the registration numbers of every vessel that circled at the edge of my cove like coyotes who knew the fence height. At noon, drones arrived, hobby grade, with VO badges zip-tied to their legs, like that would apologize for their proximity. One of them made a slow, obscene circle around my solar array. I watched the signal strength, watched the flight path echo on my tablet, watched the controller's location fingerprint itself near the south cliffs on the mainland. I took screenshots and sent them to a number in Ria's world. I used the words pattern and perch that night. I unscrewed a metal plate behind the lighthouse's distribution panel and found what I hadn't intended to find: an oilskin packet. The stitches clumsy, as if done on a moving deck. Inside, a ledger. Not numbers, names, dates, vessel IDs. The pages smelled like diesel. On the 5th page, a neat hand had recorded the name V. Carr and a time, 2:17. Then the same entry again the next week, and the next. On the 7th page, the entry changed. V. Carr plus Pelican 3, crates, time, 1:51. The route arrowed toward an inlet south of Harborview, to a buoy that didn't appear on any chart. If you stare long enough at anything, it tells you something it didn't mean to. The second day of harassment arrived with a theme: drown the island in noise. 3 boats took turns idling just off my rocks. Music turned to maximum, wakes slamming my pilings until I could feel the thud through my kitchen floorboards. When I stepped outside, someone on a bow raised a long lens as if I were a rare gull. Document the violator, a voice crowed. Evidence for the committee. It would have looked ridiculous if they hadn't slashed my windsock somewhere between dusk and dawn. If the black spray paint on my boathouse door complied, soaked into the grain like a stain I'd never be rid of. If my diesel tank cap hadn't been left askew by a hand that was too proud to be careful. The 3rd day. Before coffee could make the island make sense, I woke to engines that changed the shape of the air. Heavy diesel barges when I stepped out onto the catwalk. The fog was a live thing on the channel, and then it broke open and the scene below rewrote the word audacity. 2 tugs pushing barges packed with yellow steel excavators with their arms tucked, dozers with blades like grins. Behind them, 5 center consoles, a sheriff's boat that was the wrong shade of blue, and the white yacht at the front like a bridal gown. They came in at once. Boots on my dock, 30 bodies in mismatched police vests that still had shipping creases, men in hardettes unspooling straps and waving at each other with the confidence they must have rented with the machines. Vivian wore black tactical fabric like it was couture, an earpiece tucked like a pearl, a megaphone already feeding back with her fury. By emergency authority, she yelled, we are here to mitigate illegal structures posing an imminent hazard to our community. Demolition begins now. Real law finds its posture in posture. Fake law checks in with its friends to make sure it looks okay. The first dozer rolled, its tracks seizing on the plank ramp, blade lifted, driver in sunglasses he didn't need. When he dropped the blade into my old boathouse, the wood screamed. Racks of tools I'd just hung hopped like frightened animals. A handful of screws went glittering into the sunlight before they vanished into dust. I heard myself make a sound that didn't have a word attached to it. I walked down the path with my phone recording in a quiet I learned from people who liked to test it. Every one of you is trespassing on federal property, I said. Impersonating an officer is a felony. So is destruction of navigational infrastructure, if you think a homeowners association outranks Title 33 of the United States Code. Today is going to be a difficult day. A kid in a police vest, not old enough to have lost any illusions yet, glanced at the deputy and then at his own boots. Vivian lifted her chin so far her throat looked like a blade. You'll be arrested for obstruction, she said. Your little lighthouse is coming down. She meant it. The second dozer turned its blade toward the keeper's house and the 150-year-old stone that had stood through storms that had names. The driver revved. Smoke roped out of the stack, and the machine lunged. The wall came apart like a lung punctured by a rib. I stepped back as a shelf of my books tumbled into a chalky avalanche. Chart books, a battered copy of Botticelli's note tucked into the atlas. Find the records, Vivian shouted to no one and everyone. Basement, burn them. The men in vests swarmed my kitchen, came out with boxes that might have been nothing and might have been all the wrong something, carried them down to the edge of the dock where a man had appended a 5-gallon diesel can, the fuel slicking across, paper like it had been waiting for the job. I pulled a phone out of a pocket no one watching had noticed. It looked like a phone you could buy at a strip mall. It wasn't. When my thumb pressed the power on the bottom edge, a signal that didn't use cell towers told a net of people I couldn't see that a beacon at lantern key had gone from passive to red. The perb under the floorboards hummed twice. A message braided itself through a band of frequencies designed to ignore weather and opinion and lies. I raised the other phone and kept recording. "You are about to destroy evidence of interstate crimes," I said. "And if you like that, you're about to commit arson on a federal installation." The man with the can took 2 steps back. Vivian grabbed a flare pistol from the hand of the not-quite deputy and aimed it at the pile like it had disrespected her. "There is no evidence," she said. "There's only a hazard and I am removing it. There's a moment before help arrives when you will think you're alone. It's the moment the people who chose to be late are counting on." The first hint lived in the water. The wakes out beyond my cove changed shape. A dark line materialized on the horizon where fog had been. I heard the rotors at the edge of hearing, the low chuffing that lifts hair on the back of your neck even if you've never learned what that sound means on a bad day. The barges creaked as if something larger had leaned on the tide. The helicopter came over the shoulder of the island, from the south, low enough to slap the papers at the pile into a wild dance. Orange and white, doors open, the swimmer's harness swinging like a pendulum. The emblem that I've seen draw tears in people who didn't know less expensive ways to cry. A second helo came from the east, the sun giving its rotor wash a halo. A third beat the fog back toward Harborview. "This is the United States Coast Guard," the loudspeaker said, and the voice did not have to be loud to be undeniable. "All persons on Lantern Key freeze, drop any weapons, place your hands where we can see them. You are under arrest." Everything in the cove slowed down and sped up at once. The fake cop's eyes went glossy with the kind of clarity you don't ask for. The dozer cut its engine so fast the silence made my ears ring. The man with the diesel can set it down very carefully as if it might testify later. The kid in the vest put his hands up like he had just remembered something that mattered to him. Vivian squeezed the flare pistol tighter. For a fraction of a second, she turned toward the helicopter like she would shoot a helicopter with a plastic signal gun. A crack, like the world tearing a sheet, dropped the flare pistol out of her hand. It bounced once on the dock, skidding toward the water, until a boot I didn't recognize pinned it. The round had been non-lethal. Her scream was very lethal. Fast ropes uncoiled like punctuation. Men in gray and black slid down them with a speed that made gravity into an opinion, maritime safety and security. The first 4 reached the dock and fanned as if the island had taught them the angles that mattered. "Do not move," one of them said to a man who hadn't planned to move again until next week. "That's enough," another said, plucking the Marine Patrol badge off her shirt and dropping it into an evidence bag. A cutter peeled into the cove, its wake shouldering aside the lies. Another cutter blocked the mouth. The white yacht tried to angle away as if the ocean were a side street it could duck down. The RIKBs came in fast and tidy from the cutters, and a team in blue boarded over the stern. I watched a crewman lay his hands on the chrome rail, the kind of grip that says this conversation is over. "Vivian Carr," a woman's voice said behind me. I turned and the agent's windbreaker said HSI, and the face said tired in the way of people who have seen too much and still get up early. "Place your hands behind your back." Vivian turned toward me as if I'd written the script and she could argue me out of it. Her voice cracked around the edges. "You set me up," she said. "Who are you?" The MSST team leader took his helmet off and nodded at me as if we'd exchanged names yesterday. "Mr. Bennett," he said, so everyone could hear. "Thank you for your patience." I thought of the ledger in oilskin. I thought of the buoy in the South Inlet, unmarked and obvious in the way a lie is obvious when you finally look straight at it. I thought of all the nights a white yacht's deck lights had ghosted into my cove 2 minutes after 2 in the morning. "Back when I was a stranger to this rock, you picked the wrong island," I said. Processing took less time than adrenaline needed. The fake cops were sorted into categories: guilty and incredulous and suddenly helpful. The drivers stood with their hands on their heads, looking orphaned by their machines. One man wept when someone told him impersonating an officer carries years, not months. On the water, the boarding teams pulled a duffel out of the yacht's forward locker that smelled wrong from 10 feet away. A seal was broken with a camera, watching inside shrink-wrapped bricks. The letter V was stenciled onto. On the dock, an agent with a short, efficient stride crouched by the pile of diesel-damp papers and lifted a corner like she was turning a page. "Cancel this burn," she said into a mic. Then to me, "You got all of it from the minute they cut the engine," I said. Cameras on the mast, under the eaves, trail cam at the path, 2 birds with telemetry on the mainland cliffs. The drones brought their own confessions. She smiled in a way that didn't interrupt her checklist. "Good, we like confessions." The next days moved like a barge, slow, heavy, inevitable. The dozer bite torn out of my keeper's house grew teeth as engineers in hard hats nodded at stone that had done its time and needed friends. The yellow machines left on a tug under federal escort, smaller than their noise, a mobile command, bristled from my kitchen like a ship that had been built from extension cords. The ledger came out of oilskin and went onto a scanner with a sigh. Screens lit up with names and arrows and dates that made law out of suspicion. It widened. Of course it widened. It always widens when you stop believing the edge is an edge. Harborview Bluffs HOA had been a front with a registry and dues and picnics and a newsletter with clip-art sailboats that made your teeth hurt. Its board meetings were minutes and mimosas and handshakes in rooms with view glass. It had also been a map. The 1901 covenant was a costume over an extraction plan. Vulnerable properties, waterfront, private docks, owners alone, owners, old owners new. Harassed, document, fine, threaten, buy at a number that climbs even as it crawls. Under that, under the floorboards, a movement of crates at 2 in the morning, a buoy that wasn't on charts, a route that looked like a habit. We found the buoy at low tide when the kelp flattened under a wind that came down the fetch like it. Remembered what it had done last winter. A diver in a black hood vanished into green and came up with his fist around a rope that had lived underwater long enough to believe it belonged. The crate on the end of the rope weighed 80 pounds, and thought it was a secret. When it broke the surface, it told the entire channel an old story. People think the ending is courtrooms and headlines. The real ending comes in ordinary places. A grocery store lane, a mailbox, a pier where someone ties up and decides not to make eye contact. But the thing with an island is, all your endings have water in them. They called it a conspiracy because that is the noun that covers distance. HSI, FBI, USCG, the county DA who hadn't expected her coffee to burn a hole in her morning. They met on my dock in borrowed wind and made a wall of acronyms that moved. Harborview Bluffs had title companies, stacked like paper cups. Shell LLCs that bought and dissolved with the seasons. A casting agency contract for security professionals whose job description was present. A texting thread where a person named V asked Pelican if the South Shelf was clear Tuesday night, and Pelican replied with a thumbs up because modern crimes like their emojis. They seized a warehouse near the ferry terminal that had a door no one used and a floor that lifted in one corner, like it was trying not to tell a story. They arrested a man in a blazer on the steps of a bank as he checked his watch. They stopped a white Range Rover at the South Bridge and lifted a cargo box off the roof that clinked like it had a retirement plan inside it. Vivian's yacht went to a berth it didn't choose. Vivian went to a room where the lights don't flatter anyone. People who were hired to look like the law found themselves practicing the opposite of acting. I didn't know. A man said to me on the dock, his eyes red around the rims in the way kitchen onions can't fake. He'd been the kid in the vest. Up close, he was older than I wanted him to be. They told us it was a TV show. We signed an NDA. We were supposed to be stern. I've got 2 kids. Then tell the truth, I said for them. I slept the night after the 3rd day of paperwork and woke to the sound I'd come here for. Not the siren, not the blade. The buoy bell at the south end of the channel. 3 notes: argue, agree, forgive. The lighthouse glass caught a weak sun and threw it anyway. In that light, even the chalky bite in the keeper's house looked temporary. Ellie came the next weekend, her backpack thumping my stairs like an announcement. She stepped into the kitchen, took in the taped sheetrock and the coil of cable next to my coffee, and put a hand on my arm. I saw the video, she said. You always did love dramatic entries. Helicopters look bigger on the internet. I told her. She laughed. Then her face changed when she glanced at the gap where books had fallen. She reached down and picked up a chart book, shook plaster dust off the binding, and set it straight. I brought muffins, she said. They will not fix anything, but they are stubborn. Repairs became upgrades when the Navy CBS arrived with a list and a grin that said they already knew which screws would strip. The lighthouse got new bones where old ones asked for help. Bullet-resistant film on the glass felt like a joke until it didn't. The dock bristled with cameras that watched the water as if it were a friend who sometimes drank too much. The grass strip, which hadn't seen a landing in half a century, got lights that did not blink with weather. A bunkerite mill hadn't asked for acquired the name Emergency Communications and refused to explain itself further. A month later, a state senator in a borrowed fleece climbed my stairs and asked if he could take a picture with the lens that made the lighthouse look taller. He introduced a bill the next week that would require HOAs to register with the state, publish their books, and submit to audit every year. That would cap fines, that would create a hotline staffed by people who answered, that would dissolve an HOA that impersonated anything without the consent of anyone. Some called it an overreaction. People with a view of the channel called it overdue. They named it the Lantern Act because people like their metaphors beaten into something they can put on a bumper sticker. Vivian pled to a stack that leaned toward an age. Money laundering is a phrase that sounds clean compared to what it is. Wire fraud is a phrase that sounds surgical. Conspiracy to distribute sounds like something you could accidentally join. Put together, they make a calendar you can see across a life. She cried once on the way into the courthouse, and the camera did what cameras do to tears. The internet argued like it had personally paid for her yacht. On a Tuesday 6 weeks after the helicopters, I stood at the edge of the cove with a pair of binoculars that had outlived 3 owners and watched a gillnetter ride the EB past the south shelf. The captain lifted 2 fingers in a way that said thank you without the embarrassment of words. Fishermen keep their own record books. They notice who notices. That afternoon, a box showed up on my dock with a hand-scrawled note under the twine, for the light. Inside a new Fresnel prism, cut so perfectly that the sun fell into it and came out arranged. The messages started people from towns I'd never heard of, salt and dust in their vowels, telling me a story that had the same bones and different faces. They sent letters every week. They said our deck violated a view corridor. They made my mother cry. We sold because it was easier to be poor somewhere no one watched. Some stories ended in a way that made my knuckles ache. Some ended in a way that made me think about buying a suit and sitting in the back of a courtroom. I sent every one of them to an address in DC that lived under the name of a woman who said she didn't sleep much and believed me. The island began to teach me its calendar, which weeks the kelp sheds, how the fog holds the pine smell like a hand, where the otters like to crack their urchins, and what the sound of shells on rock feels like if you're the only one listening. The wind got a name when it came out of the northwest and knocked on the same door too many times. On nights when the stars felt low enough to touch with a glove, I climbed the iron stairs and stood with the beacon dark and the glass cool on my arms and thought about what justice actually looks like when it puts the paperwork down. It looks like an island that no longer flinches when an engine changes pitch. It looks like a kid in a vest telling a room full of strangers how a woman with the right smile and the wrong paperwork told him to scare a man into signing a piece of paper, and how that felt like a job until it felt like theft. It looks like a ledger in oilskin, sitting in an evidence room where the temperature never changes. Its pages reconciling themselves with the way the tide remembers. It looks like the moment at a city meeting when someone raises their hand and says, "How do we know you aren't a harbor view?" And the room draws its breath in and then lets it out and asks for the books. It looks like Ellie's muffins cooling on my sill while 2 agents argue about which angle shows the watermark they need, and then, 15 minutes later, stop arguing and agree they've got it and grin like kids who figured out how a magic trick really works. The real end part that felt like an end happened 2 summers later on a hot day that smelled like sunburn and new rope. I was at the ferry terminal on the mainland waiting for a shipment of conduit and bolts that would make an electrician clap like a birthday party. 2 women stood behind me in the line at the coffee kiosk, paper menus curling under the heat, and one of them said in a voice that tried to sound casual and failed, "They sent me a violation for the planter boxes. Said they created a fire risk. Then they sent another for the shade sale. Then they said the color of the deck was non-compliant." She laughed, but the sound split in the middle. "They told me if I sold by September they'd waive the fines." The other woman said, "Girl, that's a lantern key. Call the number." She didn't say call a lawyer. She didn't say good luck. She said call the number, and the way she said it made the number feel like somewhere you could put something heavy without breaking it. I took my conduit and bolts on the noon ferry with a sense that something as small as a phrase had turned. On the island, I mounted the conduit with a socket wrench that had survived the dozer and tightened it until the metal sang. When I finished, I climbed the iron stairs with a rag and a bottle and polished the new prism until the glass looked like it might be proud of itself. The light that night reached farther than it had any right to. On the day the first class of cadets read the case on a screen in a lecture hall 1,000 miles from here, a storm rolled up the channel on a spine of whitecaps that made every boat hunker down. The buoy bell at the south shelf worked itself into a fit, and I made tea and watched the spray tear itself into lace and stitch itself back together again. The island had been a door. It had also been a mirror. It showed me what people do when they are very sure they can get away with it. It showed me what happens when one person refuses to make their life smaller because someone else wants it. It showed me that a lighthouse can be a piece of glass and a lens and a story, and also a verb. On still mornings now, when the fog sits low enough to milk sound from every small thing, I hear a seaplane way out in the gray and feel that old pulse in my throat before the sound resolves into a float tour heading for the state park. I let the fear come. I let it go. The gulls fight over something shiny the way they did on my first day. The cedar shakes the wet out of its needles like a dog. Somewhere in a prison 2 states inland, a woman whose posture used to bend rooms irons a uniform shirt that doesn't belong to her and pinches a crease into the sleeve like she can still arrange the world to flatter her. She cannot. She never could. She only learned to make other people forget. Lantern Key keeps its own minutes. Kelp goes to seed. Otters train their kits. A summer kid from the mainland brings me a pastry on a kayak and asks if I've seen the orcas this week, and I tell him where the tide lines look like they might be hiding a trick. The helo from Port Angeles makes a pass once a month for reasons that are both official and human. On the days they drop, they never let the rope hit the water. Some nights I walk the path to the pocket beach with a headlamp and a thermos, and sit on the cold stones and listen to the tidal suck and the stones knocking under it and the animal sound that lives there. Older than paper and paint and fines and fraud. The stars lean in until you could swear you hear them. When the foghorn 2 points west throws its voice across the channel, the island answers with the quiet that made me come here in the first place. This was never just a story about an HOA. It was a story about who gets to say what a home is, about who counts, about what happens when a person with nothing but a ledger and a stubbornness decides to answer a knock. People think justice is a gavel. Sometimes it is a helicopter door, opening into a morning that thought it was going to be ordinary. Sometimes it is a woman at a coffee kiosk saying a phrase and making someone braver. Sometimes it is a light that used to be for ships and now is also for people who have been written out of their own deeds. One more thing, because there's always one more thing, because if I learned anything from Roots, it is that no one ever stops after the last turn when they are running. The ledger had one entry I didn't notice until months later, until the sun angled just so through the gallery and hit the ink and made the ghost letter stand up. The last line didn't say V. car. It said VC gives a say was a letter that could be anyone, an initial that could be everything. The investigator smiled and said, "We like sequels." I smiled and put the ledger back in its bag, and slid it across the table. Lantern key had an ending. The water didn't. The light turned. The bell at the south shelf argued with the tide and then agreed with it and then forgave it. And the island, stubborn, patient, unmovable except in all the ways that matter, kept doing what it had learned to do. Hold.